You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some major news out of the Fulton County, Georgia case against Trump. According to a report in The Guardian, the DA, Fani Willis, has enough evidence to bring about a racketeering indictment. So, two questions here. First off, can you briefly explain what racketeering is? And second, what is the significance of this development?
Yeah, so racketeering cases, often we use the shorthand RICO, which stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, are sort of like a conspiracy on steroids. So a conspiracy is nothing more than two or more people who agree to commit a crime, and then one of them takes one step toward the commission of the crime. But a RICO conspiracy or a RICO case requires more proof of what we call an enterprise or an organization. It can't just be a couple of people coming together and agreeing to commit a crime. You have to prove an enterprise. That's one of the elements of a RICO case. What's an enterprise? Let's think of the usual example of the mafia, the mob. So in order to prove it's an enterprise, it's an organization, you generally have to show that there are a number of members of the organization, that they have at least loosely defined roles in the organization, and that they are engaged in what's called a pattern of racketeering activities. That sounds more impressive than it is. All it takes to prove that some organization has engaged in a pattern of racketeering activities is that they committed two crimes that are listed as racketeering activity crimes, or what we call RAC acts. So basically, you have to have some structure to the organization, some generally defined roles of the people who are part of the criminal organization, and two RAC acts, two crimes that they commit.
Now, if the Fulton County and the federal case against January 6th are kind of moving forward in tandem, Trump could be charged for the same crime in two different jurisdictions. If the Fulton County DA can bring about a racketeering case and the same charges apply federally, then why wouldn't the January 6th case, the DOJ case, not also be a racketeering case?
You know, Brian, that's an excellent question. And what I will say is we have no idea if Special Counsel Jack Smith is looking at the possibility of bringing a RICO case. Why? What does the Trump organization look like? Kind of looks like an enterprise, right? There are certainly defined roles. There is the Mark Meadows role, right? Not only chief of staff, but sort of, chief facilitator of all of the phone calls and the text messages and the information that was flowing to Donald Trump on January 6th, saying, do everything you can to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win. You've got the nefarious lawyers' roles being played by people like Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell and John Eastman and Jeffrey Clark. You've got the folks over at the Willard War Room kind of manning, the crime control center, like Bannon and Flynn and Epstein. And who am I forgetting? Roger Stone. So it actually looks to me a lot like the RICO laws, the federal RICO laws, could very well apply to Trump and company. It's not just a simple conspiracy, it's actually an enterprise or an organization. Now, why would Jack Smith shy away from bringing RICO charges? Because if you bring a RICO charge, you are upping the ante with respect to what you have to prove to convict somebody. RICO is sort of a glorified conspiracy. But if I go into court and I try to prove a conspiracy, and all I have to prove is that some folks got together, agreed to do crime, and one person did something toward the commission of the crime, what we call an overt act, that's a lot easier to prove than if I'm going to put the burden on myself of proving an enterprise, proving that there were a number of members with recurring roles, more like a mob organization. So prosecutors always have to make the calculation. Do I want to charge the greater offenses that will require me to prove more and perhaps reduce my prospects of a conviction? Or do I want to go with a somewhat simpler charge that's easier to prove and perhaps up the odds of conviction.
Well, to that exact point, I mean, why wouldn't Fulton County just make it easier on themselves and bring about a simple conspiracy case? Why go for the RICO charge when the simpler conspiracy case is just right there in front of them?
Great question, Brian, because sometimes the RICO laws, the state RICO laws, and this is true down in Georgia, are very expansive. So, for example, there is some reporting that there were some crimes that may have been committed by, Trump and all of his corrupt associates trying to overturn the Georgia state elections that happened outside Fani Willis's jurisdiction. So she might not be able to bring those charges in her jurisdiction in Fulton County, but the Georgia state RICO laws are so expansive that she can use that evidence and bring it in to her prosecution to help prove that this was a criminal or corrupt enterprise. So sometimes it opens up the available proof. The other thing it does is a simple conspiracy usually carries a 5-year prison sentence. If you're convicted of a RICO conspiracy in Georgia, you're facing up to 20 years. So that's another reason to try to bring the bigger charge if the evidence can support it.
Isn't it more of a sure thing to at least go for what you're certain to be able to prove? So wouldn't Fani Willis rather take, a 5-year conspiracy charge than go for the RICO charge where, yes, it is possible that you can get a 20-year sentence, but if you don't get it, then you're just shit out of luck.
Go big or go home. If you have the evidence to prove the greater offense, then you have a responsibility as a prosecutor, I believe, to try to prove the greater offense. But here's the beauty of it. There is this thing in the law called lesser included offenses. What does that mean? It means sometimes if you bring the greater offense and you fail to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in some respect, you can still drop down in the same trial to a lesser included offense. Let me give you an easy example. Sometimes prosecutors struggle with whether they should bring hate crime charges. And I will tell you that we struggle because if we have an assault and we know the evidence of the assault is strong and we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt with the available evidence, but we suspect it was a hate crime. We suspect the assault was motivated by animosity towards somebody because of their race, their religion, their national origin, their orientation. What we are doing, if we decide to add on the hate charge to the assault crime, is we are upping our proof required to convict somebody. And the jury might say, you know what? I think it was an assault and I otherwise would have convicted of assault, but I'm not so sure it was motivated by hate. And so that's why under those circumstances, we will either forego charging the hate crime because we want the conviction, because we want to hold the perpetrator accountable and we want to protect the community, or maybe we'll try to add in the hate element. And if it doesn't convince the jury, then we'll drop down in that same case to the lesser included offense of just assault, sort of excising out the motivation, the hate. So this is what goes into our tactical and prosecutorial decisions every day.
So there really is no downside for Fani Willis to go for the RICO indictment because worst case scenario, even if she doesn't reach the level that she needs to reach for a RICO indictment, she can still defer to those lesser included offenses and just go for the simple conspiracy charges.
So let me now sound like I'm contradicting myself because you asked, is there any downside? If you bring a big charge and you fail to prove it, the downside might be that you've lost the trust and confidence of the jury. So they may say, look, you couldn't prove the greater charge. We're not interested in giving you the lesser charge because of the way you have failed to convince us and prosecute this case thoroughly and efficiently and effectively. So there is always a risk. And these are the tactical challenges that prosecutors face.
But she clearly knows that, by the way. So she's not going to throw all caution to the wind. Like she knows what the burden she has to meet is. And so if she's bringing about a racketeering charge, a RICO charge, she's doing it knowing full well that she has to meet a certain threshold of evidence for conviction, correct?
She does. And you know what? My money is riding on Fani Willis because she has brought and prosecuted and won convictions in other RICO cases that people said were pretty darn challenging. So I have a feeling she will strike the exact right balance in deciding whether RICO is the way to go down in Georgia. And based on the new reporting, it looks like she is prepared to bring RICO charges.
Okay, so now what does a possible RICO charge tell us about how many or who else might be charged in this case?
So there's no set number, but it does suggest that Fani Willis is casting a wide investigative net. Let's not forget, there was reporting that Fani Willis told Rudy Giuliani, look, Sport, you are a target of the, she didn't call him Sport, I added that. You are a target of the grand jury investigation in Georgia. And a target is somebody that a prosecutor has significant evidence proving that they committed a crime, and a person the prosecutor intends to indict. So I would fully expect to see Rudy Giuliani, as but one example, on the wrong side of the V, state of Georgia versus Rudy Giuliani. He'll get wrapped up, he'll get pulled into that RICO indictment. His partner, Jenna Ellis, I think is similarly situated. There was reporting that Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis together made misrepresentations, lied to Georgia state legislators about, phantom election fraud down there. Sidney Powell is one of the people who reportedly is also wrapped up in, what was some pretty nefarious conduct with respect to accessing Georgia voting machines. And then let's not forget Lindsey Graham, because this reporting broke back in 2020, but I've never forgotten it. Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger publicly said Lindsey Graham, in the aftermath of the election, called multiple times. And Brad Raffensperger said, his words, not mine, I interpreted what Lindsey Graham was telling me to do as urging me to toss out lawfully cast ballots. Man, them's fighting words from a fellow Republican. So I think we would all be perhaps surprised if we saw a sitting senator indicted by a state or a county district attorney. But I have to believe if Fani Willis thinks she has the evidence to include Lindsey Graham in her RICO conspiracy indictment, she's going to do it.
And it's no more surprising than a Republican president getting wrapped up in all of this. So, the fish rots at the head. So, Glenn, let's finish off with this. Are we still on track for an early August indictment in Fulton County as far as you can tell?
Yes, because the last reporting was that Fani Willis asked the judges to please clear their decks, clear their calendars, clear their dockets for 2 weeks in August. And the only reason a prosecutor would ever ask judges to do that is because she knows she's going to be occupying the judges' time during that 2-week period to run all of the RICO defendants through the courts for their initial hearing, their arraignment hearing. That is going to take some time.
All right. Well, obviously a lot to stay on top of, both with this case in Fulton County, which is very quickly ramping up, as well as the raft of other cases that we're staying on top of. So if you want to stay on top of everything that's going on, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.